I bought this book online. It was a long time coming, but I eventually received it this evening. But before reading it, I like to sort of read something about the biography of the author. I've heard of Karen Armstrong. I know that she was a lecturer at one of the universities in Toronto. I knew that she had a prolific career as a writer of religion, of different religious studies. And of course, when I started reading some excerpts here, I was so thrilled with the excellence of the way she wrote, the scholarship, that I had to do some further research, and I decided to go to the one source that I don't often go to, which is YouTube. And lo and behold, I found a conversation she had with a guy. It was on YouTube. It was called Interview with Karen Armstrong on a history of God and the case for God. And lo and behold, what do I have here? Exactly that. So I'm going to play the video now, and you'll hear what her commentary is on this book and what provoked this book.
I wrote a book called A History of God, which I suspected at the beginning would take the skeptical line of its predecessors. Yes. But I found that I was absolutely moved by the Muslim, Jewish, and Christian, especially the Greek Orthodox Christian theology, and was beginning to see my way through to not being religious in the old way, but religious in a different way.
Before we come on to the book, is that sort of the path by which you then climbed your way back to religion, as it were?
Yes, by study. By the study of the research I was doing for these new books, and it came about with The History of God, which turned out quite differently. When I looked into the intricacies and the way that people had in different faiths sort of thought about the divine, I realized what a limited idea of God I'd had before. And so that was enthralling. But also, during that time, I discovered a footnote in a book, a learned book about history of Islam. And it was quoting the great Islamist Louis Massignon, who said that the historian of religion must learn to cultivate what he called the science of compassion. That is a form of knowledge that came by compassion. That didn't mean feeling sorry for people or sympathizing with them. It meant feeling with them, compathein. And so that, he said, when you are reading an account of a religious idea that sounds quite alien to you, keep asking yourself, but why? But why? And never leave it, he said, until you can see that in those circumstances in which he or she was living, you would have felt the same. In that way, he said, you will lay aside the self and develop what he called the science of compassion, a form of knowledge that came by feeling with others, by putting yourself in other people's shoes instead of endlessly spouting out your own feelings. And that completely changed the way I both approached the work and the way I saw religion.
Okay. Let's look at the argument.
Now, if you heard what she said, pushing aside the self. And she talked about being selfless, being compassionate, and trying to put yourself in the shoes of other people. It's called empathy, without actually being in their shoes, but really trying to understand why at that point in time, whatever they were talking about and whatever they were expressing in terms of their interpretation of religion was valuable to them, and why they chose to stay with where they were and be who they are. Now, I've seen all groups of people. I've seen new Muslims who criticize each other, Shia versus Sunni, going at each other, believing that you're both right. Well, you know what? As long as you guys continue to do that and believe that you're right, and you don't be more compassionate towards the other party, you will never resolve the other. You are not God, but you will never be able to resolve the conflict that exists in terms of your interpretation of faith. And if you read this book, you'll see that there are so many interpretations of God and how religion came about over the tens of thousands of years. Not over your narrow 1400-year history of religion, no, but over tens of thousands of years. It's accumulation of stuff. That's for the Muslims. With regards to the Christians, you too. You guys stand in judgment of each other, and then you guys stand in judgment of anyone who doesn't follow your version of Christianity. Well, guess what, guys? You need to start thinking outside of the box, getting out of your cocoon and your shell, because whatever interpretation, your narrow-minded interpretation that you actually have, your blinkered interpretation of religion is what you read in books that had a bias or a tendency of prejudices towards something that suited your narrative or the narrative of the author at that point in time. You too need to start moving out of that shell and start being more tolerant, more understanding, and more forgiving of others who have a different perspective on these things. You don't need to convert the world. And let's reverse it. The world doesn't have to accept your version either. But at least you got to respect them regardless of who they are. The same goes for the Hindus. You guys too, you stand and you have this very arrogant sense of the aristocratic way of believing that you Brahmins and or the way you're going to call yourself Brahmins, whatever it is that you have in terms of your science of religion. I've read the Vedas. I've read the Gita. I've read many of these books. The Ramayas. I've read many of them. Upanishads. I know them all. I've read them. And I can tell you guys something. The stories are admirable. The stories are wonderful. But at the end of the day, though, they arguably do fall into the category of fiction. And it helps you to make sense of this world. Because a lot of the stories, while they sound very nice they sound like very nice romantic genre, they don't make sense. They almost sound like a fairy tale. And they don't make sense in this real world. And sometimes we need to be more patient towards others and less judgmental. And again, less aristocratic towards others. And give them a chance to be who they are and more tolerant. Now, with that perspective, her general message to all these religions is that we need to shift and be more compassionate and more tolerant and understanding towards one another. The word she used politely is a polite word, compassionate. And if you can exercise that and try not to argue, try not to answer the questions ahead, or ask questions in your mind that you want to pose at the other person without actually understanding their perspective, you don't have to understand their perspective and convert. Nobody needs to convert you. You can be who you are, but just be more tolerant and forgiving of others. I'm going to continue with this.